Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Green Spoon podcast. We're really excited to have Jaini Shah with us today from Wild Butterfly. Jaini is a food relationship coach, and I, for one, cannot wait to find out a bit more about what that really means and how she can help some of us in our relationship with food. So, Jaini, a big welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And it would be great if you could just start by telling us a bit about your background and your journey to this position.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jaini. I actually used to be a lawyer beforehand, working in a corporate office. And in 2020, I decided to just take a break between jobs. And that's when I really wanted to look into my health. And there's a point where I was doing this hike in the US and I really struggled. I was only 30 years old. This was end of 2019. And during that struggle, I was like, wow, something has to change. There is no way I want to be feeling this way, struggling as I'm taking each step, being breathless, like having to always catch up to people in front of me, and just feeling like I didn't have energy. And this was a trip where we were on the road like quite a bit as well, and just feeling sleepy and tired all the time. And I also had this autoimmune condition of the thyroid, which is called Hashimoto's. And during that hike, it really hit me that I need to change something. And I knew it was going to come down to food because I was doing like the exercise. I knew there was a lot of stress in my life being a lawyer. And so I said, okay, I'm going to make a change. And you know how your phone listens to you, and Google must have been listening.
Yes.
And so it popped up this ad for a program, which was this 90-day process. And the program was called WildFit. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try this because it didn't sound like a diet. I'm a major foodie as well, by the way. So I was like, I don't want to go on a diet. I don't want to stop my chips and things. I just need to figure out how to eat better. And so because it was talking about this whole psychology around food, understanding your relationship with food so that you can make sustainable changes, I was like, let me try this. Let me just do it. So I did 3 months, and it was incredible during that process how much I learned about myself, how much I learned about how I make food decisions. But not only that, the impact that it had on my health. Like I had energy now after 3 months. I was waking up feeling fresh. I was I was just doing whatever I wanted to do, had more time during the day. And importantly, the thyroid function. That was the shocking thing to me. The way that improved significantly, where doctors had told me, nope, it's an autoimmune condition. You are going to be on medication for life. In fact, your medication will only increase over life. I was completely shocked at how have I reduced and improved my thyroid levels. And that got me really interested. And I was like, there is something behind this. And I want to be able to share this with other people so that they know you can turn things around simply by being able to look at your food choices, change the way that you eat so that you feel healthier. And so in 2020, basically shifted career paths. And so I became a WildFit coach. And during that process, as I was learning more about myself, I dove into personal growth, just learning more about the mind, how it works, what are some of the other things important for health, like breathing, walking, taking care of your stress response. And through that process, I came across rapid transformational therapy. And that's a whole other thing on how the mind works and diving really into the root cause of the issues that you're facing. So I had this amazing opportunity to exchange services with a client. They did WildFit and they gave me an RTT session in return. And I decided to focus on these internal fears that I was having. So I don't know if you experienced it yourself or maybe you know someone, but had I always in a negative loop of thinking. And I always had this thing of I would always think worst case scenario, no matter what was happening. To the point where, I'm walking in a kitchen with a knife on a chopping board. And in my head, it's like, oh my gosh, don't trip because then this knife is going to come in and stab you. That's how kind of bad the internal fears were. So I did this one session, and within 4 days, there was a change in my thought pattern. All of a sudden, I was able to think rationally and logically to be like, you're walking with a chopping board. You know where you're stepping. It's fine. Nothing is going to happen. And that completely reduced the anxiety in life. And because I'm a very outdoorsy person, I love camping. And, camping in the wild in Kenya there's leopards and elephants all over the place.
Yeah.
I could now be in these experiences and just enjoy the moment without having that anxiety and stress building up like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Are we going to be in danger? And so then I became a rapid transformational therapist as well to kind of add in to the toolkit. And
Incredible.
that's where I've come today, a food relationship coach and an RTT therapist.
Amazing. I was going to say, like, when you were talking about walking with the chopping board and the knife,
Yeah.
and thinking about all the worst case scenarios, wasn't that brilliant for your legal career? Because when you're a lawyer, you're trying to figure out like all the things that could go wrong and how to mitigate against that. But amazing to have completely left that career and gone into a totally different space. How did your friends and family react to such a radical change?
Shift. Yeah, I mean, it's quite funny. Obviously, coming from like an Indian background where you're in the legal profession, that's like an ideal situation to be in.
Yes.
I remember first telling this to my dad, and he was looking at me like, sorry, you're gonna do what? And I was like, look, it's gonna be fine. I'm not saying totally leaving law behind, but I was like, I just feel like I can give so much more value here. So there was a lot of shock. My dad was like, okay, but just have your safety net there. Like, don't give up your practicing certificate.
Yes.
But there was also a lot of support that, okay, they saw the shift in me. They saw like how I had changed my demeanor, my moods. Obviously, like I lost a lot of weight as well. And they were like, fine, something is different about you. And rather than shutting it down, let's support you as well. But there was a lot of shock behind it. I never thought about this aspect, though, of the legal mind thinking that way. I'm wondering if that actually maybe fostered that kind of thought pattern as
Maybe.
well. Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But so let's go back to this. So we're talking about food relationship coaching and rapid transformational therapy. So do you practice both at the same time when you have a client, or is the coaching more of a long term and the RTT is a one-off?
Yeah, so they kind of work quite hand in hand because the RTT tools that I use about learning the rules of the mind, how you think, how your thoughts shape your reality, come into play when I'm coaching clients through the food relationship. Because if you can kind of understand your thought pattern, know where your beliefs are coming from, you can then create that shift and change that you need to make the food changes for your health. So they work hand in hand, but an RTT session on its own would be like a separate meeting with the client.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go into a bit more about this food relationship,
Yeah.
right? So how does it play out? What do you see with clients in terms of general patterns around the relationship with food and what needs to shift?
That's a great question. I have always found this is like pretty much 100, okay, let's say 99.9% of the time that it's never about the food. Okay, so whenever somebody is saying, no, but I love bread, I just love the taste of it, or I love the taste of a croissant or a cookie, it's never about the taste of that food. What tends to happen is that we've created meanings or rules or associations around this particular food that has made us have this relationship. So when I talk to clients, we want to uncover what are their food stories behind this, what's really going on. And just in the bread example, I had this client actually, and she was like eating bread all the time. So she'd have a full meal and stuff, but then she still want like a slice, a toast, a piece of bread after lunch or after dinner. And it was just something she couldn't let go of. So as we started to talk about this, I was like, when did your love for bread come about? When do you remember first eating bread? And slowly we started to peel the layers. And she used to go to boarding school when she was young. So she wasn't at home. In boarding school, they had no bread. So it was an Indian school, and so they just had South Indian food that was available. So the 4 months that she would come home for holiday, her mom would make her like the best toast in the world. And so for those 4 months, she would be gorging on that bread and loving the bread. But the thing is, it wasn't about the bread. It was the association of my mom, who loves me, is making me this amazing, delicious bread, and I only get it for these 4 months, meaning it's a protected resource. It's like a thing that's only available for a limited time. But now this client of mine, she's like in her 60s now, right? So she's an adult. And when she started to talk about that, she's like, wow. So I've basically linked bread to being the love of my mom.
Yes.
And she was like, you know what? Actually, I don't speak to her that often. And I miss her. I kind of miss her. And I'm like, well, why don't we try this then? Why don't you try call your mom every day, have a conversation with her, and then let's see what happens with the bread. And it was that unraveling. One is the understanding of where did this love for bread come from? What was the real meaning behind that? And then 3, take a different action, right? So she did that. She called her mom. She's like, wow, Jaini, I just had a great chat with my mom. And she's like, you know what? I didn't feel like snacking on the bread as much. And I was like, that's amazing because you're meeting the true underlying need that's there. And you've created now that disassociation from the food, because it's not about the food, it's the meaning she gave that this is my mom's love. Now, as a 60-year-old adult, you can recognize and start to understand that that bread does not equate to love. And so through that slow process, she was like, huh. She even messaged, she's like, you know what, Jaini? I'm done with my affair with bread. And I was
I love
like,
it.
amazing.
My love affair with bread
Yeah.
is over. That is incredible. And this it's quite interesting to hear a story like that. And, you know, bringing in this kind of mindfulness to recognizing the emotional driver for some particular foods. So there's the kind of where you might have the therapy around something like bread or any other kind of food that you just find that you're eating too much of and you're not quite sure why, maybe, or you're suffering from health issues as a result. But what about people who just want to incorporate a little bit more day-to-day mindfulness? Are there sort of, you know, techniques that you advise maybe people who think, actually, I have a fairly normal diet, but I have a slightly, I think all of us maybe have a vice somewhere in the food chain, right?
Yeah.
Mine is chocolate. I have a problem with chocolates. I'm
Okay.
just thinking about the bread example, like, okay, I need to unravel this, but otherwise it's fairly healthy and it's very controlled and so on. But in terms of mindfully connecting with the food that we're eating, do you think we're doing that enough? And do you have sort of some advice around that?
Yeah. I think we're definitely living in a world where we're becoming a lot more mindless and a lot more just automatic or autopilot sort of operations, right? Because there's not enough time, we have to do so much. How do you expect me to like sit there, be present with my breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And I appreciate that. I get that. I mean, look, I still eat in front of the TV very often, right? At lunchtime. I know that's not a great practice, but we'll come to evolutionary biology and how that plays out. But we live in this world where it's a bit difficult to do that. So there are ways that you can do it to help you really be present in the moment. And you don't have to do this all the time, by the way. Once you do it a little bit, you get better and better. The first thing I always kind of like to point out is language. The language we use. So when you talk about vice, yes, we have vice. But why does it have to be a vice? Why can't chocolate just be a chocolate? It's just a thing that I do and it's just there. It's not a vice. When we talk about language, we're also talking about things like when you see yourself having a craving and then you're trying to stop yourself from going and following through that craving and you're saying, oh no, I'm not allowed to have that, or I shouldn't have that. I can't, it's forbidden or it's restricted because of a certain health goal maybe that you have. You really want to assess how you're speaking to yourself and maybe shift and change that language to something a little bit more empowering for yourself. So I like to use the words I choose, right? If you even try this exercise, next time you're craving the chocolate or going for the chocolate, if you ever feel like, oh, I shouldn't be having this, right? And let's say on that particular day, you're like, you know what, I've had enough sweetness. I don't really want more chocolate. Just look at it and maybe try, you know what? I choose to say no today. And I choose to say no because I really want an awesome restful sleep today. And I don't want to add more sugar to my body. And so I choose to say no and I choose to feel great about it. Just changing that word to choose can have a really powerful effect because it's empowering you to make the decision that you want. But when you start saying, oh, I can't, or I'm not allowed, or I shouldn't, it's like you've given the power to somebody else to dictate what you can or can't be doing.
Yes.
So language is really important.
The other voice in your brain.
The other voice, yeah.
Yes.
Which leads to the second point on mindfulness is one is just start being curious. Start being really curious of what are these stories that you have in your head? How are you talking yourself into or out of certain decision making, right? We all have the stories, but sometimes we've got into this autopilot sort of mode where I wake up, make my cup of coffee, drink my coffee, make my breakfast, eat the breakfast, go to work. You don't have to think about it because you've already set it in play. But at some point somewhere, you had a conversation about this is my breakfast routine. So start listening. I've had a good day, let me have chocolate. I've had a really bad, stressful day, let me have chocolate.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's somebody's birthday, oh, I can't wait, I'm going to eat cake. Start listening to these rules and these meanings that you've placed around food. And really important, with zero judgment. Like just do it purely out of curiosity. Like, how am I making these decisions? For me, a really big one was holidays. So for like holidays was a time where you go all out. There's no rules, meals, make the most of the buffet at the hotel. Breakfast was a big thing because that's like the main meal where you want to have from the pancakes to the croissants to the eggs to the everything. And then I started to realize, that's an interesting rule that I have about holidays. Considering I want to travel a lot more, does it make functional, healthy sense to have that as a rule? Or is it possible that maybe I can shift my story around holidays and be like, you know what, I want to enjoy holidays, but it doesn't mean that it has to be all around food. Especially now that I'm experiencing great health, I want to wake up for sunrises. I want to be active and walk around and go on the beach or explore the city. I want to be able to be present and happy and not moody around things because personally, sugar gets me very moody. If I have sugar, and I'm talking about refined sugars,
Yeah.
I get very snappy. And I was like, I don't want to be like that on holiday. And so now I've shifted my story around holidays to be enjoyment of everything else and removing the focus on food.
Interesting.
So the next thing about that is just be curious. You don't have to spend hours and hours sitting there trying to be mindful. Just be curious. The next time you wake up, as you go for your coffee, be like, what do I love about starting my day by boiling the pot and making the coffee? Is it the smell? Is it the brewing? Is it the peaceful moment around it?
Yes.
What is it? Just be curious.
Yes. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I do with the kids as well is and this is probably one of those food rules that I've grown up with is like sit down while you eat, not run around. But the way that I say to them is like, you know, you need to send a signal to your stomach that it's time to receive nutrients.
Yeah.
And if you're running around, your stomach might miss that sign and then you might not feel full at the end of the meal. So let's just sit and we try to talk and try to have no phones at the table and just really enjoy the food. But that might segue into talking a bit more about evolutionary biology and our relationship with food. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I have to say that's amazing that you can have that conversation with kids because that's part of the mindfulness is that let's not run around. Let's actually appreciate where our food came from. Let's appreciate what we're eating. And then the more you do that, by the way, the easier it is to receive the signal that you're actually full so that you can actually stop eating. Because often in times when we're distracted, you won't recognize when you're full. And that's where a lot of overeating also comes from. So that's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear
Thank
that
you.
you're doing that. But yeah, let's talk about evolutionary biology and why this sort of, if you can understand how we as human beings are built, kind of helps us to make better food choices. So this is the way I like to look at it. And this is a really great story. If you've never read the book or heard of it, it's called Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter.
Okay.
It's a fantastic book about grains and how they affect our body. But anyways, evolutionary biology is based on the principle of how our body is genetically and physiologically made up. So I want you to, for a moment, to imagine and take yourself back in time. Okay, I'm talking about like 2 million years ago to the Paleolithic era, where we really had the hunter-gatherers who were living off the land. Okay, so we've transported ourselves back, and you're sitting around a warm, cozy fire, right? And you're sitting with these amazing hunter-gatherers, and you want to explain to them, you're going to share with them your life that you live today. And maybe, in fact, Julia, what are some of the things you would tell them about our modern world? Like, what are these amazing, cool things that we have that we've created? What would you tell them?
You know, we have a fridge full of food and we have a cupboard with food in it, and we don't have to go and hunt and gather, really. We can go to a shop and buy a packet of something that's been refined and is ready to cook, and it's easy, and I don't have to go and, you know, if it was grain, for instance, which of course they wouldn't have had back in those days, but the whole effort, which still happens, of milling it at home and so on and so forth. If you live in an urbanized situation, then you tend to have lost touch with that. I might also tell them that we perhaps don't have as diverse a diet as them, I think, because we just kind of know what we enjoy and eat often the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it would be like they would be sitting there listening with fascination, being like, what? You can walk into the store and you have aisles of like food that's available. You have fridges so that you don't have to eat your meat straight away, but you can keep it, you know, for a few days. Maybe we'd even tell them about these buildings that we have and like a house, and you've got these secure walls around you. We don't have to be worried about predators coming into camp or anything like that. Um, Often a really cool one that, when I'm doing workshops, people say like, oh yeah, what about aeroplanes? And I'd be like, yeah, how would you describe an aeroplane to a hunter-gatherer? And be like, there's this gigantic bird that you
Yes.
sit in, and then it takes you from here to here. And maybe you'll just tell them how you can communicate so easily to people across the world. And so they're there and they're looking at you with fascination, like, wow, what an incredible world you guys have created. And before you dive deeper into that, they're like, okay, but I'm curious now. It can't all be that easy. And maybe they start to ask you about what are some of the challenges that you face today in your world? Because hunter gatherers have their challenges, right? Like, they may never live to 80 years old because they may get hunted down, left behind by their tribe because they're not fit enough to keep up. But, some of the challenges that we may face, we could be like, well, we do live up to maybe 80 years old, but we also have these things called hospitals and doctors and
Yes.
medication that keeps us going. They might ask you, what's medicine? You're like, medicine's like a pill that you take or this injection that if you have a fever, you get better quickly. Or you might be able to tell them now that, one of the 5 of the top things that probably kills human beings are like diabetes, cancer, high
Mm.
blood pressure, those sorts of things are now infecting us today. And can you imagine trying to explain diabetes to a hunter
Yes.
gatherer to be like, you're consuming too much sugar? What does that even mean to them?
Yeah.
And so as you start to explain these things of having a job, having a desk to work on and sit on all the time, and the stress that you experience, all of a sudden they're like, you know what, you painted this amazing world that you live in where there's safety and security of food, but now you've thrown that world apart and said, hang on, you have these diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia when you forget who you are. And you have this slow sort of degenerative process that happens. And then they're all of a sudden thinking, you know what, I'd rather just be killed by a lion than living 10 years of
Yes.
not knowing who I am.
Yes.
And so, as you go through this journey around the campfire and you're speaking to them and you're sharing this, you also start to reflect and be like, huh, I wonder when I come back to my main world, what can I learn from these hunter gatherers that's helping them thrive a lot more? Right? And so that's where evolutionary biology comes from. We are genetically and physiologically the same as those hunter gatherers. And if we can look to them as an example of what is it that our bodies are designed to thrive on, because when you give it the right input, it will thrive. And this goes to more than food. Food is a major part, but it also goes to movement, to breathing, to stress, to seasonality. It goes through so much of that. But if we look at food, right, and you look at what they would have been eating, there would have been a variety of things, right? There's meat, there's plants, there's honey, maybe there's seafood if they're living by the sea. And then you look at what we're eating today, of how much more of grains, for example, like having bread every day, or rice, or oats, or a variety of those 3 within a day, or every day having a particular part of that, wouldn't have been available to them, right? And we don't do as much movement as them either. And then we have things in a box, or things that are made in a laboratory,
Yes.
right? And then there's these numbers and chemicals that we don't recognize, we don't realize. So we have our bodies here today, human bodies, we are here. And then we've gone ahead and created things which are here. And so now we have this gap, which we're going to call the evolution gap. And there's a gap because the way our bodies are designed today to thrive and to digest and to absorb certain things does not match what we have created in our modern Western world and what we are digesting. And that's why we're seeing all these numbers of diseases coming up that are affecting us, which we just think, oh, it's normal, right? Like as we age, oh, it's normal to just forget a little bit. Or, I appreciate, okay, fine, diabetes is just runs in the family. That's not the case. It's because we're not giving our bodies the right input in order to thrive. So there's this gap between what we need to be eating more of and what we're consuming too much of today that's affecting us. And that's what's bringing about a lot of disease. Does
Wow.
that make sense?
It's lots. I'm still over there at the campfire with the hunter-gatherers, wondering how on earth I'm going to describe some of the things that we do and how we live. But I think it's really interesting way to transport yourself and think more about how did this body of ours as human beings evolve and what did it evolve to do, and am I giving it the best opportunity to do that with the choices I'm making today? It's super interesting. We were going to talk a little bit about evolutionary biology and mindful eating.
Mindful eating. Yeah. So I think one of the misconceptions that may be around is that there is one ideal human diet for every single person, and that this is the way it has to be. I turned my health around. I was probably the advocate for like, this is the way, like this is the only way to do things. And that was, again, it was very much based on evolutionary biology. But I've started to kind of experiment a bit more and to observe and to learn and read a lot more around this area. And you tend to find that, look, there's loads of different tribes, right? We have the Hadza Bushmen in Tanzania,
Yes.
okay, who thrive on game and honey and plants. Okay, they're one of those tribes that are from that back in the day, millions of years ago. But you also have like tribes like the Inuit in Greenland who survive on purely meat because in that Arctic area, it's very difficult for plants to grow. And then you have the Bajau of Malaysia, who are also, again, a very, very ancient tribe, but they thrive purely on seafood because they live on the sea, basically. And then there's the Simane, or Siman, I don't know how to pronounce it, in Bolivia. And they thrive on the produce of the forest and the rivers. One of the misconceptions is there's only one way. And the reason I like to tie this back to mindful eating is that because your bodies can be very unique in what you need. And the more you can be present, curious about how you are with certain foods, how you are reacting, how your body is responding, the more you can get in line with what your body needs. So as an example, I've been a vegetarian my whole life for like 30 years of my life. And then I did the WildFit program. I started to become so much more in tune with my body. I could listen to it. And from nowhere, I started craving meat. And I was like, what? I have never eaten meat.
Yeah, you
in
don't
my
even
life.
know what meat
I don't even
is,
know
right?
what meat is. Like my
Yeah.
whole life, my parents, like my sisters, all of us, we grew up in a vegetarian household. Okay.
Yes.
So then I was like craving meat. Not only meat, I was craving a steak.
Red
Okay.
meat.
Like red
Yeah.
meat. And my husband eats meat. So then I was like, wow, this is really interesting. But I'm going to listen to this. Where is this craving coming from? I had an inkling. I was like, maybe I'm needing a bit more iron or B12 or something's going on there that I want to crave that. So I toyed with the idea for like 6 months because I was like, that's a massive change
It's
to
a
do,
huge
right?
cultural thing.
It's a
right?
huge cultural change.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the story of when I told my family that I'm going to try meat. But I was like, I'm going to listen to my body and I'm going to do it. So 6 months down the line, I was like, okay, fine. You know what? I've debated this in my head. It's fine. I'm going to try the meat because my body's asking for it. And I actually started with a steak, by the way. Like I didn't even start with a chicken. Straight in.
Yeah.
And obviously my husband is cooking it. We went to a friend's house because at the time we didn't cook meat at home. So we went to a friend's house. He bought well-hung butcher, proper, real great quality meat. And my husband's like, look, I'm going to cook it. And he's like a rare, medium rare kind of a guy. So I was like, I'm just going to leave it on you. You make the sauce, whatever. We're going to try it. And I took the first bite and I was like, oh, wow. I actually thought maybe I'm going to feel a bit disgusted. Like I'm going to be really weird about it. But it was fine. Like I sat there, had a bite and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And so I ate like, good sized piece of it. And I was like, let me see how my digestion handles this. Because, there's a lot of misconceptions as well about can you actually process meat if you've never eaten it?
Yes.
But here's the beauty about your evolutionary build, that if you are designed to be able to process meat, you will be able to. And I ate it. I was fine, had a great sleep, woke up the next day, bowel movements were normal, like nothing changed and it was fine. So I was like, okay, great. I listened to it. But the interesting thing was I didn't want it again the next day. And it was probably like a couple of weeks that passed before I actually felt like eating meat again.
Which is exactly how it would have been for the hunter-gatherers, right? You would,
Exactly.
kill a mammoth,
Eat it.
feast, and then go for a while without
Yeah.
anything, without
You
any
wouldn't
meat.
be successful every day on a
Yes.
hunt. You
Yes.
just wouldn't. So that was really interesting. But more so now, that was like 3 years ago. Recently, I've actually just been a bit off-put by meat. Like I really don't want the red meat.
Yeah.
And so that really ties into this idea that it's not one ideal way of eating for everybody, but it's the way of eating for you. And if you can start being present and listening to your body, then you can work with what's optimal for you. And so I really appreciate the gift that that's given me, that I can just listen, go with it, and be on meat, be off meat, be eating fruits, and then be like, I'm just kind of tired of this fruit right now. I'm going to move on to something else. And that really helps because you understand how your body is made.
So, in order to keep up with these different feelings, or what results when you eat different things, do you journal to sort of keep a record, or?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great reminder as well. I'm not so great on journaling. And that's probably why this has taken me a lot longer, actually, because 4 years down the line, I would probably know that oats kind of really give me a bit of a tummy pain. But I do now and again find myself having some oats. And I'm like, but why are you doing that? Don't you remember? Humans don't remember. So journaling is actually really, really important. If you write it down, you're more likely to be able to reflect. I did initially have a food journal where I would be writing things that are knocking my energy off, affecting my sleep, making me moody. That's why I know sugar definitely makes me moody. So journaling is a great tool to have to keep a record of that, for sure.
And going back to the kids thing, talking about food in front of children, I think is a really, it can be quite tricky, because it's one of those things. There's a wonderful book that I read, which is Every Family Has a Story, and it talks about inherited patterns.
Yeah.
And inherited beliefs that are so subconscious that you don't even know you really hold them, which is where the RTT is so interesting. If you were told as a child that butter was bad and margarine was good, or that pudding was a treat and you shouldn't have it, then the likelihood when you have your own children of doing the same thing is so high.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know whether you work with some people who are trying to instill good eating habits, or good sort of, a good emotional food connection for their children, and how you advise doing that.
Doing that. Yeah. So, I mean, most parents are probably not going to like what I'm going to say, but it starts with you. It really honestly starts with you as a parent, as an individual. Because if you have that sort of neutral emotional connection to food, you are more likely to be able to pass on that sort of connection to your kids. But if, for example, you know sugar is not great for you, as an example, right? But you yourself still consume sugars to an not a healthy amount. You eat more than would be generally ideal. And then you're doing that in hiding because you're like, no, 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 I don't want my kid to eat sugar, so they shouldn't see me eating sugar. Kids are very intuitive, you guys. Like they know if you're hiding and eating chocolate, they know it. And so what I would say is that why don't you understand your relationship with sugar? Why don't you figure out what is it that's making you want this? Why do you have to hide it from your kids? You know it's bad. And I appreciate food is one of the hardest things to change. And that's why going deeper in the levels helps you to make that change. But start with you. When you start with you and you start to understand what your rules are around food, what you understand about food, it's going to be a lot easier to talk to your kids about it. Because it's kind of contradictory, isn't it? Telling your kid, no, 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 don't eat the candy. But
Yeah.
then you're eating the candy, or you're having ice cream and you're saying, no, no, you're not allowed to have ice cream, but I am. Guess what's going to happen to that kid, right? When he grows up, he's going to be like, oh man, I'm an adult. Now I'm going all in on the ice
Yes.
cream, right?
Yes.
So it starts with you and being able to have that sort of freer relationship with food, and kind of like, I almost feel like let's stop putting so much pressure on food either. Like food is just food. It's either functional or it's harmful. And if it's harmful, then get to a place where you're able to make more intentional and conscious choices to have it, rather than it being, let's say, an emotional crutch where you don't even realize that you're using that non-functional food to soothe an emotion.
Yeah.
Because when you get to that place, then you're able to just make choices freely. Like I'll share a story with you. This, like, if you ask me what is mindful eating, this is the best way to like explain it. Okay, this is the cheesecake story.
Okay.
Okay, and this is a year after I've kind of gone through my journey. I've changed the way I eat. I've become a lot more aware about food in general and what I'm putting in. So we traveled to Lamu, and I don't know if you've ever stayed at Paponi Hotel
I
in
haven't.
Lamu.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a beautiful place. And we had traveled there in 2019. And they had this amazing lime cheesecake. Like it had like this ginger crust, biscuit crust, and it was delicious cheesecake. So we went there in 2021 then, after I've transformed my health, and I was like, oh, I remember this cheesecake. This was on the menu. But I hadn't had that kind of a dessert, like an actual dessert, in over a year because my personal choice was I'm done with sugar. It doesn't mean anything to me. But being at this hotel, and this was after COVID, so it's kind of like the first big travel that we've done. I get there, we have our amazing, delicious meal, stir-fried veggies and things, and I look at the menu, everyone's like choosing their desserts, and I'm like, I wonder, do I want this cheesecake today? I haven't had a dessert in a year. And I'm like, you know what? I want it today. I'm going to have it. I'm not going to share it, but I'm going to have it and I'm just going to experience it. So I order the cheesecake. I'm sitting on the table, everyone's chatting, but I choose in to just pay attention to my cheesecake. I'm like, I'm having a date with you and I'm just going to see it. Bear in mind, this is coming from it's not like a craving, like, oh my God, I have to have it. It was like, I just want it and I want to see, is it as amazing as I remember? So like I take the first bite and I'm like, wow, this is really nice. I was like, this is cool. Take another bite. And I'm just there. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just paying attention to each bite, savoring it, right? Like if you're going to indulge in something, then extend your pleasure. Like, why gobble it down? Extend your pleasure, slow it down, enjoy it. So I actually finished the entire slice with every bite, just enjoying it, savoring it. And I was like, this is good. Awesome. Nice. Part of mindfulness is also paying attention to the after effects of food, right?
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that moment. I was very grateful that I had it. No guilt around it, no shame either that, oh my God, you had a whole dessert. This was my conscious choice to have it. I noticed that night, though, that I didn't sleep very well. It's been a long time since I had a restless sleep. I thought maybe it's because we were on a boat and that's why I felt a bit rocky. I woke up the next day and then I was like, I think that was the sugar because we had it at dinner. And I was like, I think that was definitely the sugar that affected my sleep. So I was like, noted that down. And then I was like, let me see the next day. Am I going to want the cheesecake again? And I didn't. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty cool experiment as well, that I could enjoy that cheesecake in that moment, but not feel the need or the craving to have it again, knowing that when are we going to come to Lamu next? I'm never going to get to have this cheesecake. You know, so many people, we have that conversation. But I was happy. I was like, no, I had it then, fully enjoyed it for the 10 minutes that I was eating it, saw the knock-on effect on my sleep. I don't think I would want it that often because I'd rather have my sleep than the cheesecake.
Right? So it's the sort of priority in your mind of, actually, I value my sleep. I know I really need it.
Yeah.
And the sugar rush. That's how I feel about drinking wine in the evening, because I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. with the sugar rush and I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. And I cannot deal with that.
With that.
Then the next day is a bit of a write-off. And that really annoys me. I've wasted a day. So that's how my thought process goes around something like, I mean, I probably wouldn't be able to resist. I know this is the wrong language, but you know, look at the cheesecake and resist it. But somehow with alcohol, I find that easier to be like, no, that's full of sugar. The wine's full of sugar. I don't really want that. What we're really talking about here is the power of the mind, isn't it? And it's sort of training the mind. And one of the books I'm reading right now is Unstressable by Mo Gawdat. And he's talking about the voice in your mind. And he's also talking about how sometimes you just have to tell that voice, you're wrong, you have no evidence, I'm not listening to you today. And he talks about this example where, I don't know what his mind was telling him, something, and he walked into the street and he shouted at the voice in his head. And he was like, probably lucky that someone didn't lock me up for being mad, but sometimes you just have to have a stern conversation and ask for the evidence. And this is one of the things I think there's this kind of voice in some of our heads which says, oh, you had a bad night, you had a rough week, you had a great day, you had this, it doesn't matter what it is, you deserve X. And that's that sort of emotional connection with a particular food. And I think it's just so interesting what you're saying about, essentially it's about working with your mind on all of those things. I think it's the same with exercise. So many different things in life.
Definitely, yeah.
So if you, I think, you know, if someone's listening to this podcast and they just want to sort of start somewhere, what would be the sort of first thing you'd advise?
So before that, I think Mo has a name for the voice in his head.
He does, yeah.
I can't remember what he calls it. I think Betty or something like that. I listened to a phenomenal podcast he did with Tony Robbins where he was talking about happiness and he was talking about this voice in his head. So so look, the easiest place to start is actually start listening to the voice in your head, because right now we don't even know it's there. And so I would say the first thing is just start being curious. Because the moment you start being curious and are like, what is the voice? What is the voice? It's okay. You're not going crazy if you have multiple voices running in your head. But the first step really is just be curious. Like, what am I saying? How am I making this decision? Pause and slow down. Instead of this autopilot sort of movement, just be like, wait, how did I come to that? Notice, is it because I see food, I want to eat food? By the way, that's an evolutionary build. We were built to see food and eat food because you wouldn't know when it was next available, right? Um, and then the second thing is always ask for help, because most of this comes from an emotional point of view. I've found in 90% of clients, if not all of them, that if we work from the inside out, you're going to create a lot more of a lasting change and a lasting result, because it's not just about diet and it's not just about the food, but if you have an unmet need inside of you, and that's the thing that's governing this, then just ask for help. If you ever find yourself, when you start listening to these voices and you start noticing, oh, actually, when I'm quite sad, this is when I tend to binge eat or do something, or when I'm feeling lonely, then seek support on how to work through those emotions. Find methods or methodologies that kind of work for you, that resonate for you, right? So for me personally, breathing has helped phenomenally, like just being able to breathe from a deeper sense. And again, this comes back to evolutionary biology. We are very used as hunter gatherers actually breathing deeply. We only breathe shallow in very brief moments of time. When we're out hunting and we see a lion and we're like, crap, then we breathe shallow. But today, it's like, oh my God, I'm stuck in traffic. You're breathing shallow. Oh my gosh, 100 emails. I'm breathing shallow. I've received a red letter notice, kind of a thing, breathing shallow.
Yes.
But bring your breathing back to slowing it down, letting your belly expand and contract. And then that will also help you to be able to listen better to the voices in your head. And just be okay to feel, because I'm by no means I'm saying you have to be happy all the time. Definitely not. But what is not okay is to push our feelings down with food. That's when we run into big, big trouble. So start being curious, observing the stories, notice the language you're using with yourself. How do you talk to yourself? Seek support. It is always okay to ask for help. Talk to someone, friend, family member, whoever it is, doesn't matter, can be professional support, but just ask for help to help you work through what's going on. And then you'll be able to get to a place where you can make the changes and take the action that you want. And the one biggest thing that I work with all clients on is understanding your vision for you, right? Because if you don't know where you want to be 20 years from now, or, I actually go to 80 years old and be like, what is the quality of life that I want to have when I'm 80? That is going to govern my decisions today. Because you don't start making changes at 80 to live the life that you want. Everything you're doing today is going to have a knock-on effect. So if you're clear, like me, 80 years old, I want to have the option to climb a mountain if I want to. I want to be mobile, I want to sit on the floor, get up easily, breathe easily, have an intact brain, sharp, remembering everything. If I want to do those things, then the changes I need to make today that I need to sustain and continue include eating really well, staying away from grains more often than not having sugar that's going to damage my brain. But if you're not clear on what you want, there's no reason to change. What's the motivation, right? Like, oh, I'm living life right now. Everything is great. So the first thing I always do with clients actually is to work on that vision, their big why.
Yeah.
Why is it important for you to have health?
Maybe everyone who's listening could just get out a bit of paper, draw a stick man, and then do like a mind map around that stick man or woman, imagining that it's 80, that it's you when you're 80. What does your life look like? That would be a cool exercise
Very
to
cool
do, guys.
exercise. Actually, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Try that. And then our final question, which is really interesting given the conversation that we've had, revolves around, if there was one meal you could have and it would never run out for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It's so interesting when you send that question. I was thinking about it and I was like, what would it be? So if you had asked me this a few years ago,
Yes, I was quite interested in like the pre-2020 and post-2020, Jaini, what would the answers
Yeah.
be?
So like I'd say pre-2020, I'd say a starter, I mean the drink would definitely be like having a really great glass of wine. Okay. Starters, I don't know why this came to my mind, but like a veg spring roll, like a
Mhm.
typical Chinese veg spring roll.
Mhm.
And then I don't know if you know Wagamama's, but
Yes.
yeah, it's this restaurant in the UK that I used to go to very often. So they have this noodle dish called yasai yakisoba.
Okay.
So it's like a very nice spicy noodle dish. I would never go there now. There's sugar in everything. And then a dessert would be like a really decadent chocolate mousse. So Mediterraneo here, which is a restaurant,
Mm.
used to have an incredible chocolate mousse. So I feel like before, that's probably maybe where I was leading to. Now honestly, if you ask me today, I think it would depend on the day and the mood. And so if you ask me right now, the drink would be, have you heard of juice smooth?
Yes.
Yeah,
Juice
you
me.
just
Yeah.
okay. So they've got amazing nut milk. So they do a delicious masala tea, okay, with their really creamy cashew milk. So I think I would choose that as my drink. As a starter, I honestly don't know because it just don't have that much emphasis. But maybe like spicy cashews or something.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
a main meal like a good hearty veg burger, like a
Mhm.
really well made homemade veg patty
Mhm.
with like a really nice gluten-free bun and some maybe air fried sweet potato fries. Okay, that would be
Nice.
my main meal. And dessert would definitely be Cavs Cuisine.
Oh
Shout out to
yes.
Cavs Cuisine.
Yes.
Chocolate torte would
Okay.
be like, yeah, that would
Amazing.
probably be the dessert. But it's interesting because as I say that, it's not like there's crazy emotions running in me, but I'm just like, I could have that. And the other thing that came to mind is this homemade, it's like an Indian cake, savory cake. We call it odvo. I feel like that would be probably something I would throw in there as well. Because every time I smell it being made at home, I don't have it often anymore. Every time I smell it being made, it just like brings in this comforty, homey kind of feeling in me.
Nice.
That's
Nice.
probably what I'd throw in.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it sounds delicious. I mean, there's a reason why foods are called comfort foods.
That's right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's definitely a comforting meal.
Ah, awesome. Well, Jaini, this has been amazing. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in for another amazing podcast where I feel like I've learnt a whole lot more. And you can follow Jaini. Do you want to say your handles?
Yeah, sure. You can follow me on Instagram. It's MIZZ_Jaini, Jaini. Feel free to sign up to my emails if you want to hear more about these sorts of stories and how we can make better food choices.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.